all my fellow web readers, believe me when I say that choosing to read manhwa was the best decision you've made so far. So this reader here rather spend her money on her favorite online comics than on a taxi ride home. Reading them helps her relax after a stressful day at work because no matter how hard she works, her salary never seems to go up. The day she thought about giving up was the same day she found this amazing web novel. So the anime was based on a popular anime game, and out of the three princes, Alexander was her absolute favorite. He was elegant, gentle, and strong. She felt blessed every day to have Alexander in her life. Oh my, she's a true fangirl. She even had his picture on everything she owned. But as she kept reading, tragedy struck Alexandra. Her beloved character died. She cried all night long. Not only did her favorite character die, but his rival ended up with his love, Maureen, and they lived happily ever after. What an ending. She couldn't help but wonder, did he die because she didn't spend enough money on the game? Maybe she should have donated more? She wished she could save him. Thought about it over and over until she finally fell asleep. When she woke up, she found herself in an unfamiliar place and her back ached badly. She glanced at a nearby mirror and was shocked to see her own reflection. Confused, she looked around, and as she gazed out at the city, she noticed something incredible. People were riding in horse-drawn carriages. Her eyes widened at the sight of a grand castle in the distance. She couldn't believe what was happening. Just then, she heard a voice behind her. It was smooth, familiar, and irresistible, making her hesitate before turning around. When she finally did, she saw a gentleman with striking blue hair standing before her. Unbelievable. Oh my, it's Alexandra. He is even cuter in person. Her jaw dropped in shock when she realized who was standing in front of her. She was terrified. This is a true fangirl reaction. Her soul practically left her body. This manhwa is titled I Still Don't Know About My Favorite Character's Unwavering Obsession. Facing each other, Alexandra asked if she was all right, noticing her strange expression. He reached out his hand to her, which shocked her even more. Was this a dream? Or maybe some kind of VR? She hesitated but then reached out to touch him. If this wasn't real, it would be fine to touch him, right? But the moment she did, she was overwhelmed by the warmth of his hand. This felt too real. Alexandra asked again if she was okay, noticing her odd behavior. She was acting like a total weirdo, but how could she help it? Her idol was right in front of her. Embarrassed, she quickly pulled her hand away and faster than a flash, ran off, leaving Alexandra confused. She sprinted as fast as she could, unable to control her racing thoughts. The whole place looked exactly like the setting from her favorite web novel and game. She shut her eyes, trying to make sense of it all as she ran, but then, she tripped over a stone and fell flat on the ground. Her face and legs hurt from the impact, and that's when it hit her this wasn't a dream at all. Which basically meant she had been transported into the world of the Jewel Prince's spinning love. Even though reincarnating into another world was a popular theme in manga and anime, she never thought it could actually happen. She tried to calm herself down because the whole situation was giving her a headache. But then, the thought of Alexandra speaking to her just moments ago hit her again, and she had even touched him. The thought of them breathing the same air made her nose start to bleed. They were sharing the same oxygen from the plants and the same carbon dioxide he exhaled. She thanked God for this incredible gift and vowed to remain his fan for life. She felt like the luckiest girl in the world, and the shock of being near him was almost too much to handle. As she looked around, she recognized the scene. This was the place in the novel where Onyx, Alexandrite's rival, first met Marin. This meant she had been reincarnated into the story before they had even met. Girl, you were brought into this novel for a reason, and it's standing right in front of you. She thought to herself, if I do nothing and Onyx ends up with Marin, then Alexandrite will die. As she was still thinking about it, she heard a voice from behind. A young woman was being harassed by some men while trying to share bread, and that woman was none other than Marin, the heroine. Just as she suspected, this was the exact scene from the novel. She looked around frantically, knowing that if this was the same moment from the story, Onyx would soon appear. And just like that, there was handsome Onyx Kiro with his shiny black hair walking towards them. The sight of him was terrifying to her. She panicked, wondering what she could do because she absolutely couldn't let those two meet. As a true fangirl, she quickly calculated her options in her head. After a brief moment, she smirked, having come up with the perfect solution. Without hesitation, she dashed into a nearby store, leaving the shop owner and customers in shock. She quickly ordered and left the store just as fast. Meanwhile, Kiro got closer to the noisy and crowded scene, wondering what was happening. But before he could make a move, our fangirl sped past him like a flash. The gust of wind from her speed was enough to blow him away. His shocked expression was priceless. Just as the men were about to drag Marin away, our girl made her dramatic entrance, wielding a hand fan and grinning to herself about protecting Alexandrite. She confidently told the men to stop acting lame, which left everyone, including Marin, completely stunned. If anything was about to be torn apart, it was definitely the relationship between the hero and heroine. Our girl, now embracing her role as a villainess, was determined to make that happen. The thought of making Alexandrite the king sent shivers down her spine as he was totally committed to this new path. She felt powerful, and her grand entrance as a villainess couldn't have been more perfect. Suddenly, Marin spoke up, calling her Lady Arianel confused. She looked around to see if there was someone else nearby with that name, but there wasn't anyone else in sight. It dawned on her that she must be Lady Arianel. In a panic, she quickly covered her face, shocked that they apparently knew each other. Marin asked again if something was wrong, but Arianel was lost in thought. How could her reincarnated body know Marin? And who exactly was Miss Arianel? Could she be just an extra in the story? Before she could figure it out, the impatient men grabbed Marin's hand roughly, telling her she was done with the conversation. Marin groaned in pain and Arianel just stood there, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a kick landed on the man who had grabbed Marin. The person who kicked him was a fierce, ill-looking woman dressed in a maid uniform. The sight of her sent chills down the spines of the remaining men. She swiftly threw punches, knocking them out one by one. Who is she? Arianel and Marin stood there in shock, watching as this strong maid took control of the situation. But then, to Arianel's surprise, the maid started crying as she glanced over at her. Before Arianel could react, the maid jumped at her, hugging her so tightly that she felt like her soul was about to leave her body. "I was so worried about you," the maid said, while Arianel gasped for breath. Before Arianel could even figure out what was going on, the maid lifted her up, saying she had only looked away for a second and Arianel had disappeared. Marin bowed politely as the maid apologized on Arianel's behalf, leaving our girl even more confused. Then, the maid laughed and said it was time to return to the estate. What estate, Arianel thought, completely baffled. Before she could get any answers, the maid picked up the pace, and all Arianel could do was scream as they rushed away. Looking back, she saw Onyx getting closer to Marin. She couldn't believe she failed to stop them from meeting. She cried out, frustrated that she hadn't been able to break them apart. The maid tossed Arianel into the carriage and they sped away. Meanwhile, Alexandrite had been watching everything. He noticed the crest on Arianel's carriage, realizing she was from the noble Deer Knight family. Just then, his personal assistant, Harry, rushed up to him, calling him Prince and asking why he was in such a place. Alexandrite smiled and told Harry he had a favor to ask. Harry was shocked and asked, what kind of favor back at the Deer Knight family estate? Arianel was being treated like she had amnesia, and the doctor confirmed it. It had all started when they got into the carriage. Arianel had asked the muscular maid who she was, leaving the maid in shock and despair. Lying in bed, Arianel wondered why she didn't inherit the memories of the body she had reincarnated into. In every manga about reincarnation, the character usually keeps the memories of the person they become, but it seemed different. The maid cried non-stop, blaming herself for her lady's amnesia. The maid introduced herself as Nadia, and Arianel, still confused, called her by her name and asked if she could tell her more about who Arianel was. Nadia, determined to help, pulled out a huge hammer, saying she'd do anything to help Arianel regain her memories. Arianel couldn't help but think how ridiculous it was. There's no way that hammer could bring back her memories. It was hilarious. Arianel was the 18-year-old daughter of Count Deer Knight. Her parents were currently away from the estate. She had made her social debut on the same day as Marin, though they only exchanged a brief conversation. Arianel had been frail since birth, and even on the day of her debut, she came down with a fever and had to leave the event early. Since then, she hadn't been able to attend any more balls. Despite being from a prestigious family, she hadn't received any marriage proposals either. The useful information Nadia provided wasn't much, and Nadia couldn't stop going on about how angelic Arianel was during her childhood. Looking at herself in the mirror, Arianel thought about how grateful she was to the real Arianel, whose accident made way for her reincarnation. And with this amnesia excuse, she figured she wouldn't have much trouble fitting into her new life. Now her goal was simple, and that's to stop her favorite character Alexandrite from dying. Not long after, an invitation arrived for Arianel from the royal family. It was for a royal ball. Arianel was completely shocked. At the royal palace, Onyx and Prince Citrin were having dinner. Citrin asked if Onyx had heard the news, and Onyx asked what had happened. Citrin explained, for the upcoming ball, Alexandrite personally invited a girl. Wow, that meant the invitation came directly from our girl's favorite character. Citrin added, she must be beautiful if Alex went out of his way to invite her. Onyx replied that he wasn't interested, but Citrin teased him, saying whether you like it or not, we're getting a bride soon. Onyx glared at him, and Citrin quickly told him not to make such a scary face over a joke. In Alexandrite's room, he woke up from his sleep with his heart racing. He held his chest, thinking that even after receiving healing at the church today, the effects were already wearing off. Was he running out of time? He wondered. Suddenly, the thought of shocked Arianel's reaction earlier in the day crossed his mind, and he couldn't help but smile, hoping to at least make good memories at the ball. Wow, this manhwa is taking a completely new turn, and I'm loving it. Are you? Thanks for watching and stay tuned for part 2.